Hello there. I'm Kirby Adams, the lifestyle reporter at the Courier Journal in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm your MC for tonight's episode of the Storyteller Project. You know, we really appreciate you taking a chance on live storytelling and sharing your evening with us. Tonight, we're being joined by Humana and 5 Americans from across the nation to create community. Since 2016, the Storytellers Project has brought more than 100 shows each year to communities across the country. But we've canceled our in-person season as part of USA Today's network's response to the pandemic, obviously. And while it feels unsafe to be together in theaters, it feels necessary to be together online. So tonight, we've handpicked incredible storytellers and inspiring people to bring you some stories on the theme of growing up, my family, my culture, home, and traditions. So first up, let's say hi to all of our storytellers. And storytellers, if you would wave to our audience when I say your name, that way we can all get to know who you are. So we have Chris Howlett from Louisville, Kentucky. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
We have Ella Wooten from Cincinnati, Ohio. Hi, Ella. We have Lee Porter of Lansing, Michigan. Hey there, Lee. Thanks for being here tonight. We also have Belinda Stoner from Cincinnati, Ohio. We're glad you're here, Belinda. And Monisha Mitchell, who is from Zionsville, Indiana. We're really looking forward to hearing all of your stories. So let me kind of set the stage for you right off the bat here. Tonight is not a TED Talk. It's not Toastmasters or a how-to talk. It's not an inspirational speech, an educational lecture, or a slideshow. And we won't sell you anything except for maybe a subscription. This is storytelling, and storytelling is based on just visiting. Some will be casual and conversational. We ask you to receive all of them because that's how community changes happen. We believe creating empathy and understanding is vital at all times, and especially times of uncertainty. And I'm really excited to welcome our very first of our group of storytellers at this moment. So right now, we're going to hear from Chris Howlett, who is from Louisville, as I mentioned, with his story of growing up.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so give a man a fish, you'd feed him for a day. You teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime, which has been a staple statement in my life while growing up. So at the age of 6 years old, I was dropped at my great-grandmother's doorstep. As my mom was raising 4 boys by herself, she was dealing with her own stressors in life. She just deemed that it was best for us to be dropped off at our grandmother's doorstep. My grandmother passed away when I was 5 years old, so there was no one else there to take care of me and my 4 siblings. So my great-grandmother was the only person that was there to take care of my siblings. So let's picture a Southern woman mixed with a bit of Black Panther Party. Sunday morning churches from 9 to 12 p.m., Wednesday Bible studies, and always a good morning kiss, saying good morning, sweetheart, with a fresh smelling of honey biscuits, opening up my nostrils to either Earth, Wind, and Fire or Aretha Franklin, setting the mood for the day. Life was good. This matriarch taught me a lot of great deal, but I say the best lesson she taught me was the art of resiliency, because whatever life threw at her, all of her adversity was met with success until the time of her death. She passed away from cancer. And with the matriarch of the family gone, there's no one there to take care of the 4 of the siblings. Therefore, 2 of the siblings went and lived with their biological fathers, while the other 2, me and my little brother, we went into foster care. I lived in foster care, or I lived with my brother in 3 foster homes before we were separated due to my behavior. I was an uncontrollable child. at the time, and I didn't promote a safe environment to where either me or my little brother could be adopted. So with that being said, I lived in over 100 different foster homes. I held a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of pain, frustration, and anger. And it's just so explosive. I wanted to share my pain and my struggle. I would act out by throwing tantrums, burning objects, to even suggesting ill will to those people who has met my emotion. It is with these actions that would result in my immediate removal or emergency respite from another to another foster family. It gotten so bad at the age of 16 years old, I was sent to a military style boot camp, which was meant to get me on a straight and narrow, apply discipline to me, in which I felt that it didn't help due to the fact that there was other children there sharing the same story as me. And I really picked up a good sense of manipulation being at this facility, understanding that I was there to be adopted, however, really not fixing what the underlying problem was. So while being there for over 6 to 7 months, I was vetted by potential foster families to be adopted. And during that transition, I met a particular family that had the same characteristics that I found congruent with my great grandmother. We would go fishing. We'd always talk about hunting. We'd go hunting. It's just we would also garden. There was a lot of those things that was missing that I felt then that are now whole. So I lived with this new family right after boot camp for a year, in which they gave me the option of being adopted, in which I responded yes. I was happy. I was ready to join a family. However, unfortunately, the adoption fell through due to the wife's family, grandmother not wanting a Black child to join the family. That was the last nerve for me. I felt like I was ready to create some chaos. I was ready to let the world know like that was it. I was done with it. The next following morning, the state went ahead and moved me from the foster home and placed me with an emergency respite, which changed the outlook. I'm ready to give this man a bad time, to give him a bad time for me living with him. And I was just met with love. I found a man who shared the same characteristics as me. We would also go fishing. We would also go hunting. And I had the perspective of a Black single man, in which I never held, I never had, which was a great deal to me, knowing that I've been raised by women, and then raised by the state of Kentucky. And now I've met something that I can actually connect with. And with staying with this foster home, I was really challenged. I was able to graduate high school. I was able to join a football team. I was able to have friends that I never was able to have. So I applied for college. High school was not easy for me. I graduated high school with a 1.5 GPA. But I took the ACT, and I got a 32 on, which allowed me to get accepted into the University of Louisville. Upon getting accepted into the University of Louisville, this is the first time where I'm by myself. I have my own life. College is free. All foster kids here in the state of Kentucky all get college for free. So I didn't have the financial responsibility of actually paying for college. So I pretty much bombed out my first semester. Partying took a hold of me. I partied as much as I can just because I never had that experience. To where I had a crossroad facing academic probation my freshman year. I decided to beat this adversity. I decided to get into reach. I had a tutor. I got involved with the university. I joined a Black fraternity that really changed the scope of my maturity and my spanning of growing up, because I joined a Black fraternity that really spoke on the love of all mankind, in which I was ready to give mankind of working. I was just so hurt by the love that I didn't receive. But it really changed the outscope and the dynamic of just how I move and how I accomplish each one of my adversities. Um, so now that I have the tools to succeed, I've graduated with a degree in political science with a minor in economics. I'm also on the board of directors at the Home of the Innocents and also on the board of Citizens Foster Care Review Board. I find it essential that I am needed to serve on those roles because within my statistic, it's really hard to find someone that has made it out at the norm that I've hit. So I think it's very intuitive that I show my face, I show my story, just to let them know that there is hope at the end of the tunnel. Thank you today for listening to my story.
Acting as humans online or in person makes for healthier people and healthier communities. And we need these connections to each other and to health now more than ever, as COVID-19 vaccines are becoming, there I am, available in community. Well, thank you, Chris, in case you didn't hear me, thank you. Right now I'm just thanking Humana because they are sponsoring the Storytellers project, which sponsors our shows nationally and now virtually, because they believe that sharing stories and connections as humans online or in person makes for healthier people and healthier communities. And we need these connections to each other, we really do, and to health now more than ever. As COVID-19 vaccinations are becoming available in communities across the country, Humana strongly encourages you to consider getting a vaccine and to discuss with your doctor what is best for your health. You can visit humana.com for more about what they're doing each and every day to connect you to better health in your community. So now, on with our show. Let's head over to storyteller number 2, Ella Wooten. And here's some fair warning about this storyteller. She may make you a little bit hungry for pickles and peppermint.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm the oldest of 8 children. I'm 80 years old. In the 50s and 40s, I grew up in a community. It was an African American community called the Old West End in Cincinnati, Ohio. I lived with my grandparents, my mother, and 2 sisters, Doll and Patty. We lived on Richmond Street. And if anybody knows about any small community, this was a huge community that had everything close by. We could walk from one place to the other. We didn't have to ride buses, we didn't have to take cabs, and we certainly didn't have cars. In fact, on the corner of Richmond and Mound Streets, there were 2 huge churches, Corinthian Baptist and Union Baptist, opposite one another. Now, Union Baptist, I recall, was such a place, a huge place, and it also had an entranceway that my sisters and I would dash into that entranceway every time we had to go to school because we wanted to take those awful, dreadful, scratchy cotton stockings off before we got to school and were embarrassed. Well, across the street also from Union Baptist Church was a grocery store called Prager's. Now, Prager's is where my sister Doll bought her favorite snack, and it was a huge sour pickle. Now, the sour pickle she would not eat unless she had a peppermint stick that she could stick down in the center of the pickle and suck the juice through the peppermint stick. Ooh. Well, also, around the corner was the drugstore on 9th Street. Up over the drugstore was the doctor's office. Dr. Clark. Dr. Clark did have office hours, but Dr. Clark also made many house calls to our house because we had all of the childhood diseases like measles and mumps and chickenpox, and we didn't have them at the same time. So he was forever coming to 615 Richmond Street. Anyway, also our street, Richmond Street, had very few cars going up and down the streets. So therefore, you could always hear children laughing and playing right in the middle of the street, all up and down. You saw children doing Little Sally Walker and Simon Said, riding bicycles and roller skating. I was with the boys walking wrought iron fences and jumping over alleys. But my favorite thing was to sit and read a book. Always. The librarians in the community knew me well because I was always there. If you went through the alleyway, you could go right into the fish market. The fish market had fresh fish, but they also had live chickens and live turkeys. And we had the best turkey from that fish market because they killed it on the spot and then gave it to us. Fresh indeed, delicious. In our community, we had 3 schools. On Court Street was the High School de Poors, which was a all boys school. Stowe School was nearby, within walking distance, of course. It was the junior high school. But our school, from K through 6, was Sherman Elementary School. Now, at Sherman Elementary School, I met one of my favorite teachers, Miss McNeil. Miss McNeil always had her hair up in a bun or a ball. Now, back in those days, the women would buy these little soft sponges and wrap a little of their hair around it and make it look like they had a whole lot of hair. But when I had a chance to stay with Miss McNeil, because my parents and my grandparents had to go down south when my great-grandmother died, I lived with her. She let me know that hair was down to her waistline in the back. It was blood red. I mean, all her hair. Sherman School also provided me with one of the most important people in my life at the time. That was Dr. George W. Hayes. Dr. Hayes was the principal of Sherman School. Dr. Hayes noticed that academically I excelled. And so he gave me a challenge when I got to the 6th grade. He said, if you take and successfully pass the test to Walnut Hills High School, I will be the provider of any and everything you need, not only through high school, but also through college. Also, there was a lady down the street, and oh boy, did she fill the air with the best smelling brown skins. Well, I know you say, what are brown skins? You call them pork rinds. She baked them to a T. And when they were all ready, she would look out the window and yell, y'all come now, they're ready. And we would all dash. There was plenty to go around. Also, pertaining to school, well, on the last day of school, and that always fell on Friday for some reason, we would go and collect our report cards, bring them back home and show them. But at the same time, we noticed that our bags were already packed because we were headed to Union Terminal, which is now called the Museum Center. Beautiful Union Terminal, because where we were going was on a train down to Alabama for the summer. Boy, we had fun. We stayed with my aunts and uncle. But of course, we visited many aunts and uncles and oh, so many cousins. We had the best time. We rode horses. We went fishing. We walked all the time with no shoes on, except on Sunday when you went to church and you had to go to church. We had to pick okra We picked cotton. We fed the hogs. We did have jobs, but we had so much fun down there. And we spent the entire summer in Alabama. On our way back, when we would get off the train and finally get back to our neighborhood, all of our friends would be saying, well, hello, Doll. Hi, Patty. Hello, Ellalie. And we'd all say, sometimes in unison, hey, y'all, because that's how we greeted down in Alabama. And we did that until, of course, it wore off. So because I grew up as such a happy and safe child in that community, in that neighborhood on Richmond Street, I wanted the same thing for my children. So the first community that we lived in, it was not a happy or healthy environment to raise safe and happy children. So I immediately found us a beautiful home, and it was brand new in a suburb called Forest Park. Forest Park, the first day we moved in, we went to bed. The next morning I got up, I had the shock of my life. My youngest son, Sean, was nowhere to be found. I panicked. I went from house to house and neighbor to neighbor asking, have you seen him? Do you know him? Do you know where he is? I was ecstatically upset. Well, across the street, the lady had about 10 children, and one of the girls said, perhaps he went with my brothers. They usually go down to Winton Woods, which is a huge state park that was close by. They fish often, so you might find him down there. Well, I immediately went there, and of course, that's where I found him. He had made friends with children already. I'm like, wow. That community was just like the community I grew up in. They watched over children. We all knew one another. We visited one another. We spoke to each other. That was the perfect place to raise my children. In fact, even to this very day, those same adult children who now have even grandchildren have an annual day that they celebrate, bringing all the families and all the children together and the new generations. So, neighbors, you know just how to raise safe and happy children like me. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Ella. You painted such a vivid picture for us of your childhood in Cincinnati. That was a lot of fun. And I want to tell you that if you love our Storytellers stories, which they're fantastic, aren't they so far? You can clap for them with the like button and reactions that is there on your screen. So let's give them some big props. Lots of claps. All right, Lee Porter is next. And Lee's from Lansing, Michigan. He has our next story on the theme of growing up. Hi, Lee.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. It's good to be here. Before I begin, my story about growing up in barbershops, I have to pay tribute to my brother Charles, because he's the reason why at 8 years old, I got to go to the barbershop with my dad. Sort of the backstory is that Charles was a little bit taller than me, and he every chance he got, he always wanted to measure himself against a tree and have me measure myself against a tree. And he was always taller than me. We were the same size, but he was always taller than me. So this particular day, a Saturday, my dad had given us a job, and he had told us to rake the leaves. And Charles was supposed to go with my dad to the barbershop on that day, his first time, which was a huge deal, because we were always curious about what went on at the barbershop. And Charles, because he was older, it was his turn to go. So when my dad got back, Charles hadn't done his part. He didn't rake the leaves like my dad had said. So my dad said, well, Charles, you didn't do your job, so Lee gets to go to the barbershop with me. I was so excited. I was ecstatic. I mean, it was like I've always wanted to go to that barbershop, and this was my time. So we started down the driveway, and the barbershop was across the street. And Charles, he was kind of pouting, but my dad said, well, you got to learn a responsibility, and you didn't do your job. So okay, I was happy. I was like, okay, his loss, my gain. So we crossed the street to the barbershop, and we got to the front door, and my dad stopped me. And he said, son, he said, I know you love your mother. I know you love your mother. He said, but there are 3 rules that you have to honor before you go in to the barbershop. He says, the first rule is that you can't tell your mother anything that happens in the barbershop. The second rule is you can't talk when you go in. And thirdly, and the most important rule, is that you can't repeat anything you hear in the barbershop. You can't repeat anything you hear. Okay, Pop, no problem. I was willing to do whatever he said just to get in the barbershop. So we went in, I looked around, and the first thing I noticed was that there was all kinds of pictures on the wall, all kinds of different haircuts. And I noticed that the chairs that were in the barbershop were all worn and tattered, and some were taped up, and they were a mess, but that was okay. But what was more importantly, I noticed 4 old guys in the barbershop sitting there. 3 guys sitting, and 1 guy was sweeping the floor. His job was to keep all the hair and the debris away from the barber's feet. And then I noticed a young kid kind of going in and out of the barbershop from time to time. The kid was probably about 12 years old. The 2 barbers' names were Mr. Thomas and Mr. Bates. And although I had never seen them in person, I had heard about them in the community. And in the community, their names were Butcher Bates and Tomahawk Thomas. And the reason why they had those names is that no matter what kind of haircut you went there for, you always got the same kind of haircut. It didn't matter. You got the same kind of haircut. So I sat down, and one of the old guys that was sitting next to me, he kind of whispered to me, and he goes, did your dad tell you the rules? I said, yes. He said, okay, then we're going to make sure you understand the rules. And I was really clear on the second rule not to say anything, because the old guys got to tell their stories to me, because I was a new kid. I never heard their stories. So not talking was part of the deal. So after about an hour, my dad got his hair cut, and we crossed back over to where we lived. And now I'm one of 9 children, so I never got a haircut at a barbershop. And on that day, I didn't get one either. But anyway, we crossed back over, and my brothers and sisters, they all ran down from the porch, and they wanted to know what goes on over there. What happened over there? You know, what did they talk about? And I very smugly looked at them, and I said, I'm sworn to secrecy, and I can't tell you what goes on at the barbershop. But even more interesting, my brother Charles, for some reason, when he stood next to me this time, I was as tall as he was. I went into the house, and my mother was in the kitchen, and I could smell the aroma of my favorite dessert, something called tea cakes, which is a big, huge cookie that originated from the South. And my mother motioned for me to come into the kitchen. So I went into the kitchen, and she said, I made your favorite dessert, tea cakes. She goes, I know you'd want one after you got back from the barbershop. Sure, I love tea cakes. And she knows that. And so she says, okay, what goes on over there? I looked at the cookie. I looked at my mom, but I could feel the presence of my dad behind me. And my dad is shaking his head like, don't you dare. Don't you dare. So I looked at my mom, and I said, Mom, I said, I can't tell you. I can't tell you what goes on over there. So she kind of laughed. She gave me a tea cake anyway. So I continued to go to the barbershop with my dad off and on for a couple years. Charles got to go eventually, but and every time I went, I learned something new. It was more and more exciting. Well, one Saturday, my dad came to me, and he said that Mr. Bates, one of the owners of the barbershop, had called him and asked him if I wanted a job at the barbershop as the sandwich boy. And the sandwich boy's job was basically to run errands for the barbers. I'd go out, I'd buy them sandwiches, snacks. And at that time, I could even buy cigarettes for the adults. I said, sure. I told my dad, sure. I love that job. $3 a week, great job. So not only was the thrill of making money exciting, but I also noticed that this time when I go into the barbershop, the old guys would keep talking. When I was younger, I'd come in, they were kind of quiet. But as a sandwich boy, I was now accepted. I was part of the group. I was part of the crew now. So they felt free to talk. And I'm convinced now, after reflecting back, the things they talked about, half the things weren't true. But it was one of the few places at that time where a Black man could go and actually be himself. He could laugh. He could tell stories. He could share his emotions. It was a place where it was very welcoming. And after being there for a couple of years as sandwich boy, I really began to appreciate the value. The true value of the barbershop and the role that it played in the Black community. Well, after a couple of years, we moved. We moved to a different part of town. I went to high school. I graduated from college, and I took jobs in different cities. But I always found myself going back to or finding barbershops. No matter where I worked, I always kind of found the barbershop. I really liked going there. Well, this one particular barbershop that I used to go to was called Elvin's. And Elvin's was, he was a little bit more modern than Mr. Bates and Mr. Thomas. Actually, Elvin could give you more than one kind of haircut. But it was the same. It was 4 old guys there. They were always there. They never got haircuts. In fact, they looked homeless, but they never got haircuts, but they were always there. So one day, I'm at Elvin's and I'm talking to the old guys, and we're just kind of, just having a conversation, and this young guy comes in, and I'd never seen him before, and he asked Elvin, could he get a haircut? And Elvin said, sure. He said, yeah, the chair is open, have a seat. Guy got in the chair, and just before Elvin was going to start cutting his hair, there was the door open, and it was this guy's wife, and she said to her husband, she goes, you forgot to give me your check, when you got out of the car. She says, so he said, sure. So he took the check out of his pocket. He gave it to his wife, and off she went. Well, the 4 old guys sitting there, they were shaking their heads like in disbelief. And one of the old guys said, young man, do you mind if I talk to you for a minute? And the guy said, sure. He goes, how long have you been married? The guy says, I only been married about 3 months. And the old guy said, yeah, we could tell that you haven't been married very long. And the guy said, well, how could you tell that? He said, because he says, can I give you some advice? He goes, the young guy said, sure. He said, look, you never tell your wife how much money you make. You never give your wife your check. You never let your wife know your business. You got to be in charge of your family. If you don't, she's going to dominate you. Well, this young guy sitting there, and he's like lapping all this information up. He's listening to these old guys. I look at Elvin, and I'm like kind of giving Elvin the high sign, like, whoa, wait a minute. Well, anyway, when the guy gets done with his haircut, he's really motivated. You can tell he's listened to everything these old guys have told him. So off he goes. So I say to the old guys, you guys probably shouldn't have told him that. I said, that's not very good advice. And they go, yeah, he needs this advice. It'll make his marriage a lot stronger if she knows that he's the boss. So about a month later, I'm in the barbershop, and the 4 old guys are there. And this young guy comes back in, and he sees the 4 old guys, and he says to them, you guys wrecked my life. I went home after my haircut, and I told my wife I was the boss. I was in charge. She's going to do what I tell her to do, and no questions asked. Well, she left me and went back to live with her mother. Now I'm all by myself. He says, it's you guys' fault that my wife left. He says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to stay here while I go get my wife, and I want you to tell her that the only reason I told her those things was because of you guys. So the guy leaves. He comes back with his wife. He says, now you guys tell my wife the reason why I said those things was because of you guys. Well, it's silence. Nobody says anything. The old guys didn't say anything. So after about a minute or so, I finally chimed in and I said to his wife, I said, look, I said, your husband's right. I said, these guys gave him some bad advice. He shouldn't have listened, but he did. I said, but, you know, you guys need to work this out. So she was starting to warm up a little bit. Well, then when the old guy raised his hand and he says to the young guy, he goes, look, young man, this is your fault. This is your fault you got these problems. He says, obviously, you weren't raised in a barbershop because the first rule of the barbershop is that you never repeat anything you hear in the barbershop. A second old guy raised his hand and said, look, do you think if we knew anything about marriage, we'd be in the barbershop every day? So I looked at them, they looked at me, it was sort of this standoff. But everybody eventually smiled and they left. The couple left. And I've gone on in my life to get advanced degrees. I've been a principal of a high school and a middle school. I did different PDs and staff developments all over the country. And what I try to tell the people that I present to, I give them those messages that I learned in the barbershop. I tell them that it's important sometimes to follow rules and guidelines. It's important sometimes not to repeat things. It's important sometimes to honor integrity. And I try to have them start to appreciate the value of those lessons that I learned. So I would encourage all of you, all of my listeners, visit your local barbershop. However, if there's 4 old guys sitting there, please do not take any advice about marriage or interpersonal relationships. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you, Lee. You know, you took us through the front door of the barbershop. Never would have gotten there otherwise. And may I say, I'm very glad that those rules do not apply to a woman's hair salon, because there is no way the no talking thing would ever work out. So now it's up to storyteller number 4, and anyone who has ever been pressed into service to take care of a younger sibling has nothing on our next storyteller. Here is Belinda Stoner of Cincinnati, Ohio. Hi, Belinda.
Hello. So I am the oldest child in my family. My sister Teresa is a year younger. We grew up in the small town of St. Mary's, Ohio in the 70s and early 80s. For the longest time, it seemed like we'd be the only 2 children in the family. Then, at the age of 39, my mother found out she was pregnant. She was crying when she got back from the doctors, so I gathered she wasn't happy about this. I'd never been around babies much, and I wondered, what could be so awful about them? Well, when my baby sister Regina finally made her appearance, I found out. Regina was afflicted with the horrible condition known as colic, which makes newborns scream and cry nonstop for hours. 11-year-old Teresa and 12-year-old me had to grow up in a hurry. We could no longer visit our friends or take part in after-school activities. We had to come straight home and give our poor mother a break. Even if this had not been the rule, I think we'd have done it anyways, because we could just tell something wasn't right with our mother. I'm not sure if the term postpartum depression existed back in 1976, but I am sure that my mother had it. Most 12-year-olds cannot wait for the end of the day school bell to ring. I was just the opposite. I can remember sitting at my desk, staring at the clock, dreading having to go home and face this smelly, wrinkly creature who screamed and cried no matter what we did for her. Things were easier as Regina got older and outgrew her colic. Once again, we were allowed to visit our friends, as long as we took Regina with us. The dynamic that had been established just continued. Teresa and I didn't mind because at this point, we had grown to love Regina, like you do, babies. Regina seemed to like us pretty well too, often calling both of us Mommy. One day, when I was 13 and Teresa was 12, we put 1-year-old Regina in her stroller and walked to our friend's house. Missy and Susan were on the front porch when we got there, and I asked Susan if she would like some company. She said they would, but that they were getting ready to eat lunch, and she'd run inside and ask the babysitter if we could eat with them. Babysitter. It had never occurred to me that parents would pay a babysitter to take care of a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old while they were at work. I mean, here Teresa and I were at the ages of 13 and 12 with full responsibility for a child who could barely walk, and we weren't getting paid. Furthermore, my mother wasn't at work. She was at home on the couch watching As the World Turns. Susan ran inside, and I could hear her and the babysitter through the screen door. The babysitter said it would be fine if we stayed for lunch. And then she said that she felt so sorry for me and Teresa because everybody in town knew that we were always stuck taking care of our baby sister. That was the first time I realized our situation wasn't standard. I began to feel some resentment, not toward my baby sister, but toward my mother and my father because he was Regina's parent too. Maybe the whole thing just wasn't fair. When you're a kid, you've got little say-so as to what's fair. So Teresa and I muddled through as best we could. In addition to doing a lot of the child rearing, we also performed quite a few of the household chores, including cooking. Now, the meals we prepared would never have been featured on a cooking show. I'm talking Pop-Tarts and chocolate milk for breakfast, bologna sandwiches and chips for lunch, frozen burritos for dinner. I'm ashamed to admit this next part, but Teresa and I decided it would be funny if we made Regina earn her meal. From the age of about 2, Regina loved watching reruns of The $6 Million Man, you know, the show about the astronaut who's in the space shuttle crash, and then he's rebuilt with robotic parts. She would hum along to the theme music at the beginning of the show while trying to run in slow motion, like the main character did while doing his superhuman deeds, while humming the sound effects that played during these scenes. So she'd be like, Teresa and I thought this was hilarious. And we started telling her that she had to act like the $6 Million Man before she could eat. I now think this is terrible, and I can't believe we did it. Another big sister fail happened one day when the 3 of us, along with a bunch of other kids, piled into the back of my cousin's pickup truck. I was 16, Regina was 4. My cousin stopped at a 7-Eleven so we could buy things like Slim Jims and Milky Way bars and Cheetos and Yoo-Hoo chocolate sodas. About 20 minutes later, while cruising on the other side of town, I reached into my bag of goodies and pulled out a package of Now and Laters that I'd bought for Regina and realized she wasn't with us. My cousin hightailed it back to the 7-Eleven, where we found Regina safe and sound. The teenage clerk was cool about the whole thing. He'd pushed a crate up to a pinball machine and given her quarters to play until we got back. But I hate to think of the many horrible things that could have happened if someone else had been working there that day. Another big sister fail involved my shrunken head kit. Those things were so cool. They allowed anyone to transform an ordinary apple into a realistic replica of a shrunken head. I had gotten my kit a few years before Regina was born, and 3 shrunken heads lived in a box under my bed. I'd nearly forgotten about them until one day, Regina was bugging me to entertain her, and I was trying to study for my exams. I suddenly remembered them. Let me show you something, I said to her, and I pulled the hideous things out of the box. With their wrinkled, brown, mummified skin and black, beady eyes, they looked like props from the set of The Walking Dead. Regina was enthralled and asked me what they were. I told her they were shrunken heads. She asked me who'd shrunk them. I told her I did. I wasn't lying. And then I looked her dead in the eye and I said, you are going to watch cartoons for an hour or so while I study, and then I will take you to the park. Got it? She nodded, realizing it was in her best interest to cooperate. 2 hours later, engrossed in my studies, I realized that cartoons were over. Regina, God love her, was still sitting in front of the TV set watching the news. I worried that I'd been a little harsh and that maybe I had given her a complex, which was something our mother was always warning us about. Every time she heard us getting impatient with Regina or teasing her, she'd say that we were going to give that baby a complex. Whatever that was, it didn't sound good. I ended up moving out of the house before I turned 18. Regina was not quite 6. I worried about leaving her, but I'd had enough of the full-time unpaid nanny gig. Besides, Teresa would still be there for another year until she made her own escape. As often happens in families where unresolved issues are allowed to fester, we had little contact with one another in the ensuing years. Regina was doing great, though, making good grades, becoming a high school basketball star. At 5 feet 5 inches tall, she was a powerhouse on the court, even earning a full scholarship to a private university. I felt a lot of guilt for a long time over abandoning her and about the mistakes Teresa and I had made while basically raising her. About 10 years ago, I hosted a Thanksgiving dinner as a way of trying to reconnect with my family. My mother had since died, but both of my sisters attended, along with my father and my sisters' families. Things were a little awkward at first, like they usually are at our infrequent get-togethers, but for the most part, it went all right. Later, as I cleaned up, Regina and her youngest daughter were looking at old photo albums. Regina's youngest daughter, just as adorable as she had been at that age, same blonde hair, blue eyes, and dimples. And she asked Regina what it had been like growing up with me and Teresa. I held my breath and stopped scrubbing the pan I'd been cleaning, wondering what horrible story Regina was going to tell. But then she told her daughter that it had been so much fun growing up with me and Teresa because we took her everywhere. We played games with her, sang to her, and read to her. She said that she remembered us always being so nice to her. I nearly fell onto the kitchen floor, realizing that apparently Teresa and I hadn't done everything wrong. Despite our limitations and our mistakes, we loved our baby sister, and we did the best we could. And then I realized my parents had done the best they could too. Regina turned out to be a pretty awesome person. Teresa and I aren't so bad either most days. So what I've learned is loving a child and doing the best you can will make up for a lot of mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda. I think your youngest sister was very lucky to have older sisters like you and Teresa. Remember, you can show our storytellers how much you appreciate them. You can clap for them kind of virtually with the like button and reactions. And we are very thankful for you, subscribers, because you support this community's journalism. And for those of you who aren't subscribers, we appreciate you giving us the chance to show you our value tonight and hope that you will consider a digital subscription to the IndyStar, the Courier Journal, the Cincinnati Enquirer, and the Lansing State Journal, wherever you may live. Journalists from each of these markets coach tonight's storytellers, and they've done a wonderful job. And we're not done yet. It's time now for storyteller number 5 on the theme of growing up. Here is Monisha Mitchell from Zionsville, Indiana.
Evening. My little boy's favorite bedtime story is My Mommy Hung the Moon. And it goes a little something like, my mommy hung the moon, she tied it with a string. My mommy is good at everything. Well, naturally, as a mother, I love that story, but also growing up in the 70s, my mom and dad hung the moon, and they knew everything. My father was the dean at the local university, and my mother was the librarian at the community college. My father is brown, and he is from South Asia. My mother is white, and she's from America. And so picture the 1970s. My father, his office was in the basement of the student center. So 1970s, Afro puffs and bell bottoms everywhere. And little old me there in the midst of all these young revolutionaries, speaking every language and from all different cultures and ethnicities and races. I felt like I was growing up in a diverse rainbow. Well, I'm actually Black. I guess I should say I'm biracial, but it's the 70s in America. And so there was no mixed dish. You were Black or you were white. So I was Black. And most people grow up in a really insulary kind of environment and leave to go out in this great big world. Well, I grew up in a big, beautiful, diverse rainbow full of possibilities, but I left to go out into a world that was actually smaller than the four walls that I grew up in. Most people also grow up with a degree of homogeneity. You have your parents, you have your dad's smile, you have your mom's eyes, you have your grandfather's nose or your grandmother's hands. I didn't. I was different from my parents in every external, superficial way that the world saw, but I was like them in every way that really mattered to me. But again, America, 1970s, they saw things in black and white, and I had to pick. I had to pick, check a box. I didn't feel like I fit in any box, and then I kind of felt like I didn't fit anywhere. Hope was on the horizon in the form of my first Black friend, Randy. And if you could imagine me as a little girl, I was chubby and always had really frizzy hair, lopsided ponytails on my head. And I never had stylish clothes because my intellectual parents felt like it's what's inside that matters. Well, at 8 years old, you want to be stylish. So I never had the fancy clothes, but boy, Randy did. She had so much style, and she had this beautiful brown skin and perfectly curled hair, which I later found out was a jerry curl, and that I actually had the curls that everybody in the 80s was looking for, and I was constantly trying to hide. Well, as Randy and I grew, as our friendship grew, I got to spend the weekends at her house. And her family went to church. So every Sunday morning, we woke up to the smell of bacon and the sound of gospel music. And her mother was like a fashion model on Sundays. Oh, she dressed up. And she always wore these really high heels. I didn't even know how she could walk in them, but she did. And when I was older, I had a closet full of heels as well. So back to the 1980s, away from my major investment in shoe wear, that first Sunday going to church with Randy's family, I had on a dress that I'm pretty sure came from the Little House on the Prairie line at Kmart and Nikes. I stuck out like a sore thumb. And that was kind of my life from 8 years old until not that long ago. I I was out of place, and I was included, but never really had a sense of belonging. And here's the thing about inclusion. It gives you this sense of being welcomed in spite of your differences. And once you're in the door, then what? Because we still have all this pesky diversity that we haven't sorted out. Well, I proceeded to kind of live in the entryway, if you will, never quite going all the way in, never quite being myself. And I had a whole life in the entryway, children and a career. But the breaking point came, and there's going to be a breaking point because you can't live wholeheartedly and authentically in the entryway. So I had a crisis of conscience. And what I'll describe next can only be compared to the dumpster fire that was 2020, but on a micro level. In the span of 4 years, beginning in 2015, I had a baby, got married, got divorced. That was just the first 3. I lost about 100 pounds and got in the best shape of my entire life and ran my first 5K, only to find out that I had a heart condition that I was born with that could stop my heart. And then my granddaughter died. Before he could bring me to his highest calling for my life, God had to bring me to my knees. And so in that year preceding the pandemic, I had already experienced the isolation. I experienced the loss. And I even experienced the major health crisis that could end my life. But what I learned in all that pain, what I found in all that pain was freedom. I started showing up in my own life. I stopped morphing to fit in every situation. I stopped trying to be small enough to fit in the box. And I started following God's path for my life, even when I didn't know his plan. So that heart condition was a blessing because every day I'm reminded that my heart is in his hands and he is the source of light. I am fearfully and wonderfully made, and I belong to him. We are diverse. All of us are diverse. And diversity is not a training. It's not an annoyance to be managed. Diversity is humanity. And inclusion is what's kept us from annihilating one another on this big blue ball that we all occupy together. But neither one of those things requires any work. Belonging requires work. You have to show up, and you, not the you want to be or the way you think you're supposed to be, authentically you. You have to do the work and show up because real belonging is messy. Real belonging doesn't just accept you in, it rejoices that you're here. So from being born into diversity and living in hollow inclusion to now experiencing the greatest sense of belonging I could ever imagine. When my little boy sings, "My mommy hung the moon, she tied it with a string. My mommy is good at everything. I'm shining, and I'm teaching him too as well." Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Manisha. And that's a very helpful story and very inspiring. We appreciate you taking the time to tell that story to all of us And to all of our storytellers this evening here on the theme of growing up, let's have a look at everybody one last time if we could. Yeah, everybody's still out there? Fantastic. Well, this has been the best hour of my week. Thank you for all that you did. Those are wonderfully crafted stories. And we rejoice in the fact that you came to share this hour with us. We hope we'll see you back here again for our next Storytellers in just a couple of months. So again, from everybody in the Storyteller Project, thanks for being here, and we'll see you again soon.